All right, well, let's get going. My name is Jeremy Rasmussen, and welcome everybody to today's seminar on planning and executing capital projects in volatile and uncertain times. Great cover image here of the Hoover Dam that was designed and built during the Great Depression. Next slide. And I'm joined here by three panelists, Hillyard, Michael Dubreuil, and Feroz Ashraf.
Sorry, Jeremy, it just doesn't want to advance. There we go.
Okay, thank you. And we've got a great agenda lined up for today. We're going to do some brief introductions so you can learn a little bit more about each of the panelists. We're going to talk about the current economic conditions and challenges, and a very brief overview on who PTAG is. And then we're going to get into both the planning and the execution areas of projects in these times. And then we're going to get into a Q&A session. And just kind of one quick note on the Q&A session. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button within the Zoom app. And within the Q&A app, please enter any questions, and we will queue those up for the end of the session, and we'll put those towards each of the panelists. We've also got a great diagram here of a number of TVA projects, again, designed and built during the Great Depression. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Jeremy Rasmussen. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at PTAG, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Steve?
Yes, welcome everyone. My name is Steve Hillyard. I'm the General Manager of the PTAG Houston and Gulf Coast Region Office. Welcome everyone.
Good afternoon, everybody. Look forward to taking this time to talk to you. My name is Michael Dubreuil. I'm the Managing Director here at PTAG, and I have over 35 years in projects, and these certainly are some interesting times. Feroz?
Feroz, you're muted.
Yeah, Feroz Ashraf, 35 years in EPC business, including 7 years of operating a projects international mining company around the world with 6 different locations. And I certainly look forward to talking about a very interesting and challenging subject called how to execute and plan the project in this uncertain times. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Feroz.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, before I get started, I'd like to thank everyone who's decided to join this webinar. I think, according to our records, this is the largest and most diverse group that we've had participating in our webinars. We have folks from Asia and Europe, Central and South America, and of course, the United States and Canada. So thank you all very much for making time for this presentation. You know, in these challenging times, we've all faced many challenges, and there's a lot of things that we could be talking about in this webinar. But what we've chosen to do is sort of set the frame around 5 principal areas that we'd like to discuss and build on. However, if you're facing any challenges that you'd like to pose a question to this panel, feel free, as Jeremy said, to send those questions over, and we'll try to fill those answers, or perhaps we can take them offline and get back with you at a later time. What we'd like to do today is frame the 5 principal areas for this discussion. That's COVID, commodity price fluctuations, the current administration impacts and opportunities, and the potential for the adjustment that'll be needed to those with the potential of a new administration within the United States. And then finally, the consolidation in the EPC and contractor markets. So, you know, getting back to COVID, I think we've all experienced this both in our personal lives and certainly in our business lives. But in capital projects, it's unique. With the restrictions of movement of people and craft labor and social distancing and creating a safe work environment, it's posed unforeseen challenges within the construction market. I think for the last 100 years, We haven't had this type of pandemic across the world that we're facing with COVID. And it looks like the COVID challenges will continue well into 2021. So, you know, we've had an increase in material cost of perhaps over 6%. We've had limitations in construction craft labor based on the restrictions that cities and municipalities are placing on that labor moving. I know we have a client in Minnesota. We have a project in Minnesota currently, and we have labor in Illinois. We have a client that has that situation, and there's restrictions even between states of moving people and goods. So earlier this year from Texas to Louisiana, the Texas State Troopers set up roadblocks and were inquiring of the movement of people and whether it was truly an essential business. So these challenges obviously pose a problem for executing these major capital projects. Next slide, Michael. Here we're trying to show an illustration of the increase in prices that we're seeing reported. This is a graph that was prepared by the Association of General Contractors. And if you'll focus on the red line, you can see that construction bid prices since May have gone up about 6%. Next slide, please. Additional economic conditions that are driving the challenges that we're facing. Project teams are being significantly reduced. We hear in the news is full of information about the owner companies and the staff reductions. Well, this has a dramatic impact on their ability to staff and execute major capital projects. Additionally, small and medium-sized suppliers have gone out of business. Bloomberg recently published an article that said that 36% of the small businesses are at risk of closing. And as far as large companies go, I think Forbes published a list within the last week or so of the 20 largest companies that have either filed for restructuring or have closed completely. And the three of those that we've referenced here in this slide deck are McDermott, Whiting Petroleum, and Diamond Offshore, but the list is long. And these are companies that we're highlighting here for this discussion that have assets over $5, $6, $7 billion. So these are large companies that are facing tremendous economic challenges. Granted, not all due to COVID, but still, COVID certainly has impacted their ability to execute their projects efficiently. Productivity rates are down. Obviously, you have camp restrictions, craft and professional personnel availabilities, travel restrictions. That's even impacting PTAG's business, the ability for us to move people from the Houston office to Calgary or Edmonton or British Columbia, some of our project sites. That's posing a unique challenge for consultancies like PTAG, as well as the general contractors and owner organizations. And then, of course, while we've recovered from the peak unemployment rate, we're still at, I think in the United States, I think we're still hovering around 8%. This slide shows, you probably can't read these slides, but I'll just describe to you on the left. This is a slide that indicates that red line indicates the reduction in productivity as a result of the COVID impact. And then on the right-hand side, what you see is the increase in overhead expenses associated with the health and safety of the workforce. So you have hygiene and personnel equipment, cleaning, PPE, all of those administrative costs, increased health staff for monitoring and screening employees before they get onto the project. So you have a reduction in productivity and an increase in overhead expenses. This is another chart from the Association of General Contractors of America. And if you look at the red line, that's the industrial and commercial construction. You can see that employment is down over 7% still from its low of 16% drop back in April. We mentioned that there were 5 areas that we wanted to set the frame for. So commodity price fluctuations. We're all very familiar, especially here in Houston, we're very familiar with the oil and gas commodity prices. While they've recovered a little bit in the last few days, they're still significantly down, and it's putting a lot of stress on the operators, which has a direct impact on their capital spend programs. But in the same time, commodities like lumber and steel and copper and zinc and some of the precious metals, those prices are going up while the commodity price of oil and gas is going down. So that, obviously has a direct impact to the project's economics. And then the third area that we'd like to talk about is the adjustments that we have made, both positive and negative, with the current administration. Their withdrawal of the Paris Accord, the relaxation of EPA regulations, the increased emphasis on electric vehicles, and the trade tariffs and bilateral trade deals that have been made. We've adjusted over the last 4 years, the industry has, to both the positive and the negative impacts of that. But here we are in an election year with an uncertain election result. And now that's placing us in a situation of preparing for the potential for a restriction on offshore drilling, for instance, or fracking, or leases for new projects on federal lands. Those all pose a real and certain problem that needs to be planned and dealt with as we move forward into a potential administration change here in the United States. And then finally, the last thing I'd like to talk about is the consolidation in the EPC and contractor markets. What we've seen over the last decade, which continues today, is a consolidation, fewer players, fewer major EPC companies available for owners to engage, and less flexibility as far as contract structure, compensation. That has a direct impact on the owner teams as they plan and execute their major projects. Fewer choices typically means less flexibility and higher cost. So that's the frame that we would like to work within today. If you have any particular questions or concerns about a unique challenge that you're having with your capital projects, please feel free to send those over and we'll try to address them later in the presentation. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Michael for his part.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'm going to give you all a brief background on who PTAG is and what we do in the market. And then I'm going to talk to you about planning in these uncertain and volatile times. So PTAG is a project management, program management, consultancy advisory firm. We do work Canada, the US, and around the world with our international clients. We have an office in Brisbane, Australia. And we provide support primarily to owners on their sustaining and new capital programs. We bring expertise that helps them leverage emerging industry best practices. Sorry about that, this thing's getting ahead of me. There we go. And it's our mission to increase project predictability and success rates. We do that by being members of various industry organizations, such as CII, the Construction Users Roundtable, the American Association of Cost Engineers, the Project Management Institute, et cetera, as well as very specific industry associations, depending on the industry. And our staff is involved in research, is involved in various committees and communities of practice, where we invest in helping to develop new business practices, one of which I'll talk to you about a little later today, that'll improve where we're going with the market. So now I'm going to talk about planning. Somebody once said every dollar spent in planning saves multiple dollars in construction. So following sort of the same format that Stephen talked about, trying to cover all 5 of those key areas. The big one we're all facing right now is COVID. And if you were in the middle of a project, it's a good chance that you've looked up your force majeure clause. In a lot of cases, had to invoke those clauses. And now you're either in the process of coming back to work or planning to come back to work, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. But under force majeure, all parties have a duty to mitigate the cost overruns due to the schedule delays caused by COVID. Force majeure doesn't let us out of contracts. We have to stand up and meet our obligations. And the way we do that can determine how well we do. So we think that by taking 3 particular approaches: transparent communications, early problem identification, and on the next slide, a collaborative approach to mitigating the risks that come out of force majeure and project delays, we think there's a great chance to minimize the impact to all parties. So transparency in communication allows us to identify all the issues. It allows us to prioritize those issues, not only with respect to the project, but also open discussion allows us to say, what other priorities do we have with other customers, with other projects that may well be and may well warrant some consideration for all parties to adjust accordingly. So getting the issues out and putting them on the table allows the opportunity to have that discussion. And the earlier we do it, the better. Early problem identification is such a key ingredient. It gives us the time to work through the solutions after we've prioritized which of the issues we need to deal with, whether it's key equipment delays, whether it's skilled craft availability, whether it's adjustments made to the work faces that we have to plan for as social distancing dictates that our crew sizes are typically going to drop by at least a third, if not a half. So the more time we have, the better. And then one of the things that we like to advocate is using a formal approach to that problem solving with all the parties involved, using the lean A3 decision-making tool. It really helps with focusing us on describing the problem, looking at the alternatives, and collectively coming up with the best alternative to resolve that problem. And then, as I talked about, the third major part of that stool to mitigate well, or as best as we can, is collaboration. That's the secret ingredient. It has to include all suppliers. And through collaboration, through using a formal problem-solving technique like an A3 form, we have to work through the standard stuff we do in any planning assignment on a project. We look at risk, insurance, scope, etc. And it's the ability to be openly transparent, to let the other parties know what the issues are. And through collaboration, what we have found is you don't yourself have to depend on knowing the answers. Others may see things that you don't. They may be able to adjust in ways that you hadn't anticipated that either reduce the risk or resolve the risks completely. Things like scope. Do we change scope? Can we change scope? Should we change scope because of the COVID delays? What about design alternatives? There's a real opportunity for value engineering during this planning for bringing your project back online because of COVID. A little example I have off there on the right is rebar, right? Maybe in your project, they talked about ties. Well, maybe connectors are better, or maybe welding is better. Really depends on your project, and it really depends on what's more important for that particular issue. Schedule, cost, or scope. But as you look at all the various aspects of your project and go through a value engineering approach, you actually have an opportunity to step back, look at the alternatives, and plan appropriately to mitigate to the greatest extent possible the impact of project delays because of COVID-19. Health and safety protocols are still in a state of flux. I mean, what was it, 2 weeks to bend the curve back in late March? And here we are going into the holiday season in the US, the last half of November, and they're still changing. Some states are opening, other states are shutting down. States with the same set of challenges are all handling them differently. And Stephen gave you a couple of examples that, just transportation between states, between countries, travel restrictions, exemptions from travel restrictions, vary by jurisdiction and make it hard to plan. These are the things that you need to use something like that A3 to help understand what those solutions are. And I'm going to let Feroz talk a little more detail about some of those solutions. But as Stephen said, productivity is taking a hit. So again, looking at planning, there are some great tools out there. One of the tools that comes out of the Construction Industry Institute out of Austin, Texas, is something that's called advanced work packaging. It's a new best practice coming out of the Construction Industry Institute, and now more than ever, as a planning tool for all of us to take a look at, advanced work packaging brings some real elements. And based on the research and based on validated field trials, advanced work packaging can reduce costs on a project by as much as 25%. So a tool that's certainly worth talking about. And why do we plan? We want to get our projects back online. But another reason to take a look at planning in these uncertain times is there's going to be a flood of money coming around the world. I'm going to talk about New Zealand in particular because they're ahead of us. They've beaten the COVID demon and they're starting to spend money. But governments around the world are looking for shovel-ready infrastructure projects to boost the economy. And infrastructure is not necessarily just roads and bridges. It can be whatever is ready in the eyes of government that's going to put the largest amount of people back to work. They're going to prioritize projects that can move into construction in 2021. So either your engineering is done or your engineering can be done in a timely manner such that you will be able to go into construction in 2021. And as I said, New Zealand announced a stimulus program in late 2019. They've added to it. And they've taken an approach where they're going to use new contracting methods that are based on collaboration and integration. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, those new contracting strategies as a means to plan and plan with more certainty in cost, schedule, quality, and safety in these volatile and uncertain times. So depending on which approach you look at, alliancing was the first of the major contracting strategies to come out. It started out in England in 1990, migrated to Australia and New Zealand, where it's pretty much part of their project culture, particularly in the infrastructure part of their construction. Then coming out of primarily the California area in 2000 was industrial project delivery as a contracting strategy in the commercial and institutional world. And then in 2018, the Construction Industry Institute published I2PD based on 2 years worth of research. And I2PD stands for Industrial Integrated Project Delivery. So that it's aimed at the industrial projects. Because what we found and CII is IPD for commercial and alliancing for infrastructure were not being adopted in the industrial world. And so they took a look at that and they realized that, that neither one of them was in and of themselves a good fit. And so we launched some research back in 2015 that was published in 2018. So what's needed to rapidly plan and deliver capital projects? It's either to get your projects restarted or to take advantage of some of those infrastructure dollars that are coming from various government levels of government in North America and around the world. Well, you need to identify your projects. You need the stimulus funding to be available if you're hoping to take advantage of that. We all need streamlined permitting processes and regulatory support if we're going to move a project rapidly from initiation into construction. The design needs to be available, or the design needs to be such that it can be fast-tracked. Your organization needs nimbleness and agility to be able to participate in something that is now what we're all getting used to, the new normal. Commercial structure, contract basis to be able to proceed. We need to identify and bring the key stakeholders together for optimum decision making. Who are the right parties to take on that project that you're thinking about? And in a collaborative way. Project professionals from your organization and those that you're inviting to the party need to have a mindset that they can do it differently, that they are willing to be highly collaborative versus the traditional siloed serial approach we've taken over the last 70 years. And then from a skilled human resources, we need participation of labor leaders to ensure that the work rules are optimized, that craft can be ramped up and trained and onboarded. And we need the ability to bring the millennials and the Gen Zs into the workforce. You put all those 9 things together, and we believe you end up with something that was published, as I said, in 2018, Industrial Integrated Project Delivery. So what is I2PD? I2PD is the building of trust through collaboration, integration, and open communication to deliver improved safety, earlier cost and schedule certainty, and optimized design. If you go back into the 1950s and 60s, we had design, bid, build. That was bilateral contracts on purpose that transferred risk and separated the decision making. It was a win-lose approach and a best for me culture in terms of looking after myself based on the agreement that I've signed. We improved over the years a little bit, but still we have significant failure rates that I think Feroz is going to talk about as we moved into EPC and EPCM, the construction management at risk. We added a few new key elements: early involvement of key players, co-location, partnering sessions. And then in 2018, in the industrial space, we added I2PD. And that brought in relational contracting, multi-party agreements, shared risk and reward, meaningful shared risk and reward, equitable decision-making, and what we call a best for project culture rather than a best for me culture. So industrial integrated project delivery was built on the commercial IPD that I talked about, that has strong collaboration principles that improved the design process, and the alliancing principles that is built on integration principles that reduces construction risks. And in the industrial world, we have both design issues and construction issues, and to a much greater extent than the other 2 industry sectors that I talked about. And so those 9 principles are the bedrock that I2PD is built on. A case study, there is an I2PD project being executed right now. It is an 8-year, 8-unit hydroelectric refurbishment project. It is 100% I2PD from planning through to pre-construction as we get ready to go into execution. That was supposed to start in June. It was delayed a year because of COVID. You can see there in the pictures there, all the players representing all the various parties, or 5 parties in the room during the validation phase and the pre-construction phase, design and construction planning phase. Out of that, they developed a shared risk reward model that all parties signed on to in terms of sharing the risks and sharing in the savings and innovations that they were willing to bring to the table. A jointly developed risk assessment, and as I talked about, a multi-party agreement that all parties, including the owner, signed on to. The parties being the owner, the engineer, the project managers, the general contractor, and the major equipment suppliers. And what we've seen so far from the RFP process to where we are now going into execution, the cost estimate, the execution budget was reduced by 32% from the RFP. And we ended up with schedule improvement of 36%, again, from the RFP for the selected proponents. And with that cost reduction, with that shortened schedule, all vendors were prepared to put 100% of their profits at risk to participate in an equitable decision-making and multi-party agreement for this project. So pretty powerful messaging. And so what we've seen is that I2PD increases speed, trust, and transparency. It delivers faster designs, an integrated and accelerated execution, improved cost certainty, and improved schedule certainty. One of the methods that support those 9 principles I talked about, and I talked about a little bit earlier in terms of I hope you guys can hear me. I hit a wire here. So value engineering is a creative, structured method for reaching an outcome of the highest value at the lowest cost. If you take a look at that pencil, functional analysis of that pencil, there's a number of elements. These are the elements: the band, the barrel, the lead, the paint. And it's a systematic approach to evaluating those elements to prove the value of those elements at the lowest overall cost. Value is the ratio of element function to cost. There's a few different ways to define value, as you can see here. And if you think of value engineering in terms of your project, what value engineering is not, is it's not cost cutting. If you want to de-scope your project because that's the appropriate decision that you've worked with in a collaborative manner with your partners, that's a great approach, but that's not value engineering. Historically, it comes out of World War II. The Japanese captured Southeast Asia and cut off the supply of rubber. And so they had to come up with synthetic rubber. And then, you know, what they discovered is that that approach was a method that could be applied across the industrial sector. So value engineering is a process. It's a series of 6 steps going through from the information phase to the implementation phase that allows you to take a look at alternatives at each phase of the project. However, it's better used earlier in the planning phase. One of the things that industry has learned is to use third-party facilitators and subject matter experts from multiple organizations to prevent groupthink and biases. It's that old Albert Einstein quote that says, if you approach your problems the same way and come up with the same answers, you're probably looking at a definition of insanity. So, as I talked about, one of the best ways to to do value engineering is early in the concept phase. It's a simplification process as you're taking a look at your technology selection and alternatives. And then again, as you're in your detailed scope and define phases, as you've picked your approach, and now you're looking at subsystems and components of your approach, and trying to do value engineering as you make your design considerations. The potential cost savings and functional improvement impact decreases, as you can see based on the red graph there, as we move through the various project phases. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Feroz Ashraf, and he's going to take us through executing during uncertain times.
Look, even in normal circumstances, doing a project is difficult. I've spent 35 years and done over 300 projects, some small, some medium, some large projects, over $200, $300 billion worth of projects over my lifetime in different parts of the world. And I can tell you that there is no easy way to do the project. There is a systematic way of doing the project. There is a disciplined way of doing the project. There is a wishful thinking way of doing the project. And there is what is called proper disciplined approach and contingency planning way of doing the project. So what I would be highlighting today is that executing the projects during these uncertain times, volatile times, unpredictable time is even more challenging. What is really happening, and I have had an opportunity to evaluate many projects in the last 3 to 4 months with various clients around the world and even in Canada. And what is happening is that most of the clients are, because of the delay, because of the cost pressure, because of other things, they're actually trying to accelerate the project and mitigate the project by cutting corners. And my guidance to them is that it should be the other way around. They should be doing more planning. They should be looking at more mitigation. They should be doing what the normal band of good practices should be. And over and above, they should be looking at what are the other factors that are affecting this project. And here are some of the factors that I'm mentioning to you. First of all, you need even clearer or clear focus on clear execution plan supported by a very, very specific project-specific and contract-specific contract strategy. You need to be agile. I'm not saying we need to add a large team members, but whatever team members you have, it's multidimensional, it's agile, it's fast-moving, it's quick decision-making team. We need to identify not just the risk, because everybody's focusing on risk. And I'm saying is there is equal opportunity, in fact, far greater opportunity in looking at opportunities in value engineering. And Michael and Steve, you highlighted some of the areas of value engineering. Projects are where the projects are. And why I say remote projects, the reason why there is a remote project is because of the social distancing and because travel is restricted. Even if the project is 20 kilometers away, if you cannot travel to the project as often as you can and you can be at the project, it can be a project which is 2,000 kilometers away. It doesn't really matter. A 20-kilometer project is as difficult to reach as a 2,000 kilometers project. So remote project and enhanced construction methodology is the key. FM is, we call field management. At PTAG, we have our own proprietary software where we are encouraging some of our clients, most of the clients, to say, you know what, it's time that you look at the field management and remote work phase planning and progressing facility. You cannot go to the site, look at the amount of cubic meters done, the amount of length of pipes that you have installed. You have to look at virtual, visual, and progressive and interactive methodology where the contractor can be logging in certain amount of progress and your team can be in sync with the owner's team, sort of recording the similar progress so you are in sync. So we have a software, a methodology that helps us. Likewise, inspection quality is a big issue, particularly in the fabrication shop, because you would want to go and have a look at the things. Has it been done properly? You look at everything. You need to look at the visual quality of the wells and all of the items. How do you do it sitting so many kilometers away? So there are now tools and techniques that we are promoting in how you can do inspection quality virtually. Of course, a lot of companies are using drones, laser scanning, cloud, 3D collaboration tools, point clouds to look at the engineering drawings so you don't have to go to the site and do all the physical measurements. You can do by laser grammetry very, very quickly. Remote fabrication. Remote fabrication not only at the site, but right now we are involved in about 3 or 4 major projects, multi-billion-dollar projects, where the clients are actually, because of the labor density, they're actually setting up 4 or 5 assembly areas within the plant. Assembly area A for process plant, assembly area B for processing mining equipment, industrial equipment, whatever it is, 4 or 5 areas, so that you can spread out the workforce. You can do the work in a different areas, and once you have advanced a certain stage of prefabrication and pre-modularization, you can then actually bring the equipment of the spools to the real construction area, so you minimize what is called the labor density and intensity. So the idea is to sort of minimize the density, because you cannot work in a vertical fashion. Most of the projects, if you look at the refinery projects, they're vertical. How are you going to be doing so much labor segregation and social distancing when labor intensity is a big issue? So most of the clients are looking at on-site pre-modules, pipe spools, prefabrication. Look at that. In addition to that, smart vehicles, automated vehicles, so that you can minimize the labor and camp density on the site. These are all the important things. Caterpillar and many other suppliers are offering that solution, so look into that. Next slide, Michael. Look, this is a slide that I really like, and this is the source from, on the left side, Brendan Bachtel in 2016 sort of presented it. Mero, who is the founder of project management, and so on and so forth, presented in 2011. Ernst & Young presented in 2014, and CII presented in 2004. And different statistics, but all these statistics are revealing. To say the least, they are eye-opening. So such a large percentage of projects, because of various reasons, are not meeting the business cost and schedule situation. This is in the normal circumstances. I would be very happy in the next 5 years to receive another set of statistics to see how well we did during the COVID time. My gut feel is that the statistics, unless we are able to do some proactive and few things that Michael and Steve talked about, that the statistics are going to be more challenging, because there is more pressure, more difficulty, more challenges, additional challenges, unpredictable challenges that are being faced by the projects over and above the normal challenges of the project. So now with Call-It, we have to look at many other elements, and those elements are critically important, because once we analyze about 100 or 200 projects, what goes wrong, what are the root cause of the project, we found that people, teamwork, alignment, and soft items that we are talking about, the planning items, the permitting items, the regulatory items, the advanced work packaging items, those are becoming a more significant issue, as opposed to engineering delays or engineering was incorrect. In fact, most of the time, equipment and engineering is never the real cause of the problem. It's the productivity and workforce planning that becomes a big issue. Next slide, Michael. So, how do you execute the projects in volatile and uncertain times? You have seen various versions of this slide. So I think I'm not going to be sort of propagating something that you already know, but look at the left side of the project. You start on the project at the concept, feasibility, detailed scope, detailed design, construction. As you move from left to right, the green bar that you see that goes down, the ability to change significantly or exponentially drops. In other words, you have all the time in the concept stage and feasibility stage and even in the planning stage of the project to do trade-off study, analysis, what-if analysis at the low cost. The moment you start getting into detailed design, the curve starts to steepen down. And the moment you are in construction, the only thing you can do is construct according to the design that has been approved. There's not much you can do. You cannot start changing the design. If you start changing the design or optimizing during construction, you're going to pay even higher dollars. So we did the analysis, and a lot of companies, they start to do what is called last minute optimization. And the last minute optimization is the worst thing you can do. If you want to do optimization and value engineering, and Mike talked about the value improvement curves, the process simplification, and all of the item is to do it upfront. Spend $1 upfront, it's going to save you 25 later on. If you don't spend it upfront, you're going to start making the changes in the middle of the project. But guess what? You're going to spend $20, and maybe you might get $25 of the benefit. The cost ratios will not match. In fact, you might even start to make changes, you might even spend more. So the idea is get it upfront. And as the cost expenditure rises in the project during the construction phase, you need to do this. So value engineering planning is the key that you need to do. Next phase, the next slide, Mike. So look, it is so obvious. You need to have a very disciplined, fit for purpose, stage gate approach. Most of the companies that I know, and in fact, I did a study and audit on some of the projects recently, they want to go from step 2, the feasibility, into detailed design. And they say, you know what? We have lost 6 months. We have an opportunity in the project. Let's just skip the step number 3, or let's skip step number 2. And they're trying to jumpstart the project. And they think they're gaining schedule and they're gaining time. And my view in them is, it is the area under the curve. If you're not going to be doing it systematically up front, you're going to pay in the later. So my suggestion is, even though you may have a pressure from your management and from your shareholders to accelerate your project, do employ agile, fast tracking, good accelerated project execution, but don't skip the project. Don't skip the steps. Go through the various steps. I don't want to go into the details of these steps because Mike and I covered it in our previous seminars. And if you want to go and have a look at the previous seminars, please go and look at it, how effective the front-end planning can help you in the project's phase. We have a lot more details at that time, and we would be pleased to answer that. In other words, get all the planning and concept and feasibility and detail scope done up front, so that, and do all the contingency planning that you need to do, because not only you need to do for what if scenario, the base case, you have to need to, what happens if I have a COVID situation? What happened if I have an equipment delay? What happened if there is a COVID situation at the site? What happens if the equipment comes late? So all of that is now reflected in this chart that we are saying. Make the project setup correctly, make the contract formation, the gray box, set up the WBS and OBS correctly, make sure you have a control process in hand, the analysis and trending, because I can summarize it on one line. If you fail to plan, or if you fail to set up and plan the project in detail, I can tell you, you will set up to fail. You will sub-optimize or compromise your project. Now, I'm not saying that some of the very, very good, strong project teams I've seen, they have come and they have accelerated the project. But let's not look at the exceptions under the normal curve. There's always the 10% of the people on the left and the right that do exceptional things. But I'm talking about the majority of the projects that people are being run. Look at the kickoff, look at the contract strategy, look at the document management, resource planning, construction planning, risk management, operational readiness. And operational readiness is a very key element of the project, because it is not about when the plant is built, how I'm going to operate it. It's actually, it should be the other way around. How I'm going to operate the plant, which is how I'm going to construct the plant, which is how I'm going to sort of design the plant. In other words, it should go from right to left. Next slide, Mike. So, many companies, lots of companies, whether they are small, medium, large, they have volumes and volumes of project procedures, governances, and all the items. And sure, I'm not a proponent to say that you don't follow your governance process or short circuit your governance process. But what we have found is that in one particular company that we recently, they had 20 volumes of a project execution manual. They had a manual on how to use a project execution manual. So I'm saying is, and the teams are so busy and so hard pressed that they do not have the chance and the ability to go into thousands and thousands of papers and look into the details. So what we did was we converted into what is called a 50-60 page quick reference guide. It is not to say that you don't use your project management systems and details. It sort of links from a small handbook in a live links to your main manual. And what really happens is that now that the interactions are so virtual and so distant and so remote, the project team need to be even more ever present, up to speed on what needs to be done. It needs to be a self-propagating guide. So we have developed a manual, which is simple. We can help you if you wish to, because that manual by itself is going to create what is called the GPS for your project team. The GPS means it will tell you whether you're going to reach on time, you're not going to reach on time, what kilometers you're going, where you should reference to. Is there a traffic jam? Is there not a traffic jam? Is there a way to sort of move forward with the project? This manual will give the team a quick access and guide. Next slide. So we talked about in our previous presentation, during my many years of project execution, we have come up to say, look, people always say, how do you do the project? Define it, scope it, schedule it, cost it, execute it, right? So simple. And yet 98% of the project don't end up on time. 7% of the project don't meet the scheduled deadlines. So here is once again, it's simple 10 steps. Do the project setup, do the stage gate, look after the team structure, governance, prioritization, do all the risk analysis, do the residual things, do the project management system and integration as part 7. QA, QC is very important. Community and sustainable plan, CSR plan is extremely important. Site layout, logistics, and logistics are becoming even more, and look ahead on what needs to be happening. Don't look at back, look at what needs to happen. So a rigorous execution plan with multidimensional contingency planning is becoming extremely important. So you need to not only do your project planning, you have to say, what happens if I miss this? What happens if this does not happen? What happens if the productivity falls? What happens if this happens? So on, so on, so on, and do all the mitigation measures and have a contingency plan ready. Then and only then you would be able to meet your project objectives, or you will have a higher chance of meeting project objectives. Next slide. So I've been a big proponent of constructability. I'm always saying people start from left, study feasibility, detail engineering, procurement, contract, construction, and I'm going to operate it. I'm going to say, don't do that. Go in the end. How are you going to close the plant in 25 years? How are you going to operate the plant? How are you going to operate it? How are you going to construct it then? And then how are you going to design it so that you can construct it in the best possible way? Go the reverse. Look at the constructability. Look at how the constructability will take place in this constrained COVID situation with labor productivity and availability problem, vertical construction issues, social distancing, health, safety, security, logistic issues. You need to look at everything and look at all the non-standard reviews. How can you lower the workplace density? How can you use autonomous equipment? How can you make the equipment sanitization, staggered work schedules, local sourcing, all the other stuff that you need to look at? These are all the opportunities that you still have. You must avail it. Because if you don't avail it, the cost data is showing that the projects are going to be facing 10, 15, 20, 30% cost pressure. So you're going to be part of the tidal wave If you're not going to do mitigation measures, you're going to end up floating, and you're going to end up spending 15, 20% of your project due to called silent COVID cost pressure and increase. Next slide. So other things to consider. So I did talk about what are the standard things that you need to consider in the standard times, but we are not living in the standard times. We are looking in the unusual times. So what you need to do is the impact of COVID is still evolving. Mike talked about force majeure, mitigation of force majeure, how you can deal with it from a contractual legal point of view. There's tons of literature available on that. We can help you. In fact, we are helping many of our projects sort of mitigate through what is called third-party assessment of what is called force majeure minimization of impact, nimbleness and agility full, and right-sizing the project. In other words, we just did a study on number of projects, and we found that companies have a standard book. If they do a $50,000 project, they use the same process. They do a $5 million project, they use the same process. They're doing $300 million of the project, they're following the same process. And I'm saying, why do you have to apply a $300 million, a big fat project execution guideline on a $50,000 worth of pump or $100,000 worth of project? Simplify it. But they did not have a process within the organization to do it. So we sort of helped them develop what is called fit for purpose execution plan. So we decided to identify what is called the complexity index 4 being the most complex, complexity index 1 being the least index. So depending on the priority and the impact of the project, we came up with a plan where they can logically go through a very systematic way in which they can adjust the project. So one size does not fit all. I was the firm believer for many years to say, hey, you have a simple process, roll it out on all the projects, good, bad, or the ugly, and just adjust it as you go along. The reality in today is that with the type of team and the conversion of the team, you do not have the ability. So adjust the thing to the contracting strategy and put the right level of complexity to match the right level of project requirement. Fabrication and delivery is extremely important. Even though fabricators and suppliers are going to commit to you, we are finding that there is continued delay because of a variety of good reasons, and that you need to sort of take that into account in the planning. CAM consideration. I mean, in many projects, we see that the labor density was estimated to be 1,500, 2,000 people. So they built a camp of 1,500, 2,000 people. Now they cannot put everybody side by side because of the COVID restriction. They can only put 40% of the people. And the project is moving towards an execution phase. Within the next 3-4 months, they're going to be hitting a peak thing. So how are they going to accommodate 1,600 people with 40% occupancy distancing requirement and so on? So they are adding last minute camp requirements. So I'm saying is do the planning for camp requirements, because it's not a very big item, but do the contingency planning in such a way so that you can accommodate the right shift and right things at the same time. Risk sharing is very important because most of the contractors, the engineers, the EPC companies, they are mitigating their risk. So if they are supposed to, and owners are going and sort of bidding lump sum, say, hey, I'm going to transfer all my risk to the EPC contractor and the construction contractor. Guess what the contractors are doing? They're adding 5, 10, 15% risk premium because they don't want to lose the money. They don't want to make too much money, but they don't want to lose money. So what they're going to do, they're going to add on these extra layers in their cost. And what was bid as a package 6 months ago, these same packages are coming back now with 10, 15, 20% higher cost. So what we are saying is the best way to manage that risk premium and the extra contingency is for owners to take the responsibility of risk mitigation and work with the contractors on a risk sharing mode to solve it. Next item. So as part of our PTAG manual, as I mentioned to you, we have developed a complexity model, and for each of these, PDM means Project Delivery Model 1, the most simplification form, to PDM 4, which is the most complex form. There are levels of scope of work and the levels of deliverables and the levels of details that we have. And we find that some of our clients are finding it very, very useful to provide an immediate guidance to the team as they are working remotely on their projects. Next slide. Advanced work packaging, Mike, you talked about it, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but interactive planning, project setup, there are many companies who are actually selling what they call AWPs and IWP softwares. If your project is very complex and so on and so forth, you will benefit from doing the software because that software plans for you. It's called the interrelated and relational execution planning. So if one part of the project is delayed, it automatically adjusts to so on. Do the advanced work phase planning. Work phase planning used to be done at the supervisor levels and at the construction levels because we had very qualified supervisors and trade leaders. But now those trade leaders and supervisors are not there. Even the construction contractors are facing with lack of resources. So what used to be in the minds of the people is no longer translated into work phase planning. In fact, a lot of productivity decline that is taking place in the construction industry these days is primarily due to lack of resources at the construction or contractor levels because they do not have staff to do what is called work planning or even advanced work planning. Next slide. So in your selection, you need to do that. Now, here's an example of how you know how the cars were built 100 years ago to how the cars are being built now. I mean, look at it. And if you ever go and look at the assembly line of a company, they spent a lot of money on improving every step of the project, inventory just in time. Now compare this to exactly how we are doing construction. I mean, there is no comparison. I built many General Motors, Ford, and many of these assembly lines for the people I was involved in. And for me, it was an eye-opener because first I said, this just looks like a simple automation and kind of step. But really, I mean, it requires a lot of robotics, a lot of planning. We don't need to do to that extent in our construction project, but we need to, the main improvement that they got, the number 45 that you see, is really how to do the process improvement. In other words, planning and process improvement. Next slide. So I like this slide. I like this slide because I saw it in one of the digital EPC conferences, and what it really shows is mining on the left side versus utilities in the middle, and some of the Amazon and other companies in the near top of the curve, and then you have what is called the advanced industry. So look, do you think Amazons of the world are suffering in these COVID times? No, in fact, the volume has gone up. Look at the UPS, the volume have gone up. Look at the Googles, the volume have gone up. Apple, the volume have gone up. So who are suffering? The people who are suffering, who are what they call non-digital people that have stuck to traditional way of doing things. So I would say that move towards, there's a lot of opportunities for improving and registering and minimizing the workforce. Look at the customization of the project. Look at how you can save dollar values. I'm not saying that you should not people on the site. I'm saying take advantage of digitization and process improvement. There are many methods, and we can help you in many areas, including our field management software as an example and other management software. Next one. So this is just, I was having a big discussion with my adult children. I have 3 children, and I asked them, I said, I showed them the circular slide rule, and they actually said it was a slide rule. But when I asked them to use it, and I still have one of them in my home, and I said, can you use it? They were unable to use it. I spent all my life using these dial tones telephones, the big IBM box that we used to have. In fact, the word processors that used to be there used to be like 4 feet tall kind of a unit. And if you look at the sound system and the camera and all the other police map and everything that you had, everything now and more is just in that little iPhone or the handheld device that we have. This is the enormous amount of improvement and digitization that has occurred, at least in my lifetime. And I cannot believe the amount of progress that has done. But I can tell you, the first project I started in 1976, I visited that project about 5 years ago, and they were still doing the project in that same plant. Not much from a construction point of view had changed other than safety awareness and few things. So we need to be more agile, nimble, interactive, and look at the best practices and other things to do. Next slide. So, Jeremy, I will hand it back over to you, but I will just like to say, look, how will COVID end up to be? I have lived in my career, and Michael and Steve likewise, gone through oil crisis, financial crisis, Cold War crisis, other crises, Fukushima incidents, so many of them, 7, 8, 10 major crises. This particular one, COVID one, is exceptional. It's exceptional because it touches everyone. When it was Fukushima, people said, that's only the uranium industry. Oh, it's oil industry, it's only the oil industry. Oh, and so on and so on and so on. Financial, it's only the financial institution and so on and so forth. But this one touches everybody across the board, and it touches everybody equally. The impact is far-reaching. The personal impact is far more. The health crisis is significant. It's not just economic, it's health, social, economic, mental, everything. So I think that it will be a while, and it's my wish that we get out of this thing as quickly as we can, but we need to be able to sort of, from a construction point of view, manage it the most effectively. So we won't be able to manage the external situation. We won't be able to direct the wind, but we can certainly adjust the sails and how we do the project. So with that, over to you, Michael and Jeremy and Steve. Thank you.
Rose, thank you very much. Great quote to end on. And thanks, Stephen, for setting us up at the beginning of the presentation, and to you as well, Michael. We're going to enter into the Q&A section of the presentation now. And just if you do need to get in contact, and we encourage you to, any of our panelists, Stephen, Feroz, or Michael, we've got their contact information up on the screen, and we'll leave that there for the Q&A portion. You could also use the camera on your smartphone to take point at the QR code, and they would automatically add their contact to your system. So let's start off with an I2PD question from Jacques. For having, and I'll direct this to you, Michael, for having a 32% less than an RFP mode, you still need to build a team of suppliers for submitting a proposal under I2PD. So I think Jacques asking about being able to kind of get those price reductions at the beginning of a project, having a team of suppliers in line.
Sure. So the reductions came after the selection of the 4 vendors, and as we put the 4 suppliers together with the owner, our base price was 32% higher, and so that's after a competitive bidding process. And where the reductions came from was collaboration, and the collaboration started first with integration. We integrated the teams, it became a single team. And we locked ourselves away in these big rooms, and we started reviewing scope. And as we walked through the scope and started understanding the scope, the first thing that happened is all the various assumptions that the OEM made versus the constructor versus the engineering firm versus the PM. Everybody made different assumptions for their particular scopes of work, but when they came together as a group and reviewed, what we found is that there was significant savings by coming together on a unified understanding of the scope. And it wasn't just the suppliers that learned about the scope requirements, the owner as well better understood their scope and saw that their set of assumptions didn't necessarily hold true as we walked through that. So that was the first thing. coming out of that exercise, or I would say right in the middle of that exercise, what the 5 parties recognized is that there was a better way to distribute that scope. So in that particular project, both the OEM and the general contractor had tradespeople and all the overhead that comes with tradespeople on that project. And they realized that if they let the general contractor handle the tradespeople and they swapped some scope, that they could significantly reduce the price of the project. Again, I think that accounted for 12% right there. By reducing the number of safety people we had to have on the project and construction management people and so on and so forth. So that was a big part of it. And then I would say the third part of getting that 32% came up with just alternatives, alternative approaches to executing the work. You know, the GC came at it from one point of view, the OEM came at it from another point of view, the engineers had different things in mind, and as they sat down and looked at the technical requirements, they realized that, and what we ended up doing is just by resequencing the work, we got significant savings that in the end ended up with that 36% savings in schedule. So that's where the cost savings came from. Hope that answers the question.
Question from Fernando, and I'd like to put this to you, Feroz. Can we still rely on traditional methods like critical path with the resources uncertainty going on nowadays? How can we cope with this issue, and what would be most suitable method to apply? Agile projects, perhaps, due to their iterative nature?
Look, the traditional methods of the traditional best practices must still continue. So today, I'm involved in a number of projects, and on one of the projects, I've asked the team to say, you are just about to enter a active construction or execution phase. Have you done a resource loading diagram? And they said, no, not yet. We will get the contractor to tell us what kind of pipe fitters, electricians, and others that they will need to bring it. And I said, by the time the contractors comes and tells you, you would be ready to award it. So yes, so critical path method is extremely important. Look at the critical path and look at if there is a float or not a float and what you can do. That's number one. Number two is do the resource loading diagram in detail and by trade. What I mean to say is that if you now have a project in Sudbury, Northern Ontario, Houston, wherever they are, look at the trade availability in that region. Laborers are no longer moving long distances. They prefer not to move long distances. So what you're going to be doing is, if your project is located in one area, most likely, you would be attracting the resources or the labor within 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers of that thing. So you need to look at the resource loading and seeing if you pipe fitters and all of them qualified people are available in that area. And you need to sequence it, plan it, and see if your project is in competition with another project 50 kilometers away, and do the resource leveling and what is called resource leveling and so on and so forth. So yes, so look at that, look at the resource loading, look at the agile methods, and then sit down with your contractors, and based on Mike was talking about, get the contractors, get the engineers, get the EPC contractor, get the owners team together and say, well, how can we streamline this project so that we have minimum handover and interfaces, and we are all working towards one execution and integrated plan, and you're going to eliminate some of the in-between handover steps, and you will get a better success. I hope I answered the question.
Thanks, Rose. This next one's for you, Stephen, and it's from Warner, who asks, with the productivity reductions of 20% in these volatile times, does that increase CapEx by 20%? And are more accommodations required in remote locations to make up for the shortfall?
Well, that's a good question, and it really dovetails into the question that Feroz just answered. You know, right now with the changes in labor productivity rates and skilled labor availabilities, this is putting a lot of stress on what we would say are our estimating norms. When I first started in this industry over 40 years ago, you know, I was handed a book that said, you know, a pipe welder would produce so many inches, diameter inches of weld per hour with this type of crew. And today, with social distancing, with COVID, with space limitations, and with crew and skilled labor availability, that's putting a lot of stress on all of the things that we thought were settled within the construction industry with respect to productivity rates, crew sizes, labor, and cost. So right now, I would say no. I would say I would think that you would have to take a very careful look at your cost estimate and the basis for your estimate and the basis for your schedule to understand what effects the current labor productivity rates and availability are. I would not rely on estimates of labor hours and material cost that were based, let's say, in the fall of 2019 and before. I would think all of those need to be challenged and looked at very carefully. Feroz, do you agree?
Yep, I think so. That reduction of 20% productivity is what we saw in the first few months of the COVID situation. And as you know, we are doing projects for many of our clients. And what they did was they started to challenge each and every items and started to implement improvement in every single step and working towards an integration methods. And they have reduced what was supposed to be 20% productivity impact and increased impact due to COVID down to 5 or 7% at this stage in some of the client cases. In some cases, they brought it down to 3%. In some cases, it's down to 10%. What I'm saying is there is tremendous amount of opportunity. So increase in cost has to be offset by streamlining of the cost. So if you don't do the streamlining of the cost, yeah, you're going to end up with not 20%, Jack. You're going to end up with more. So you need to put the mitigation measures and the improvement process. So if the contractor is coming to you and say, hey, I have a 20% impact due to productivity, you're going to say, I understand that. Show it to me, prove it to me, and tell me how and why you cannot improve and improve your productivity 10% every month for the next 6 months. So these are the kinds of challenges and interaction that you need to put forward to be proactive in order to move forward. Over to you, Jeremy.
Great.
Yeah, sorry, Jeremy,
ahead,
I'm just going to add in, I'm going to jump in on that. You know, it's as I talked about it, it's not only understanding that the contractors have a 20% impact, but it's being willing to sit at the table and bring your engineers to the table and your quality people to the table and your OEMs to the table and say, look, we can't put 7 to 10 men on a work face for this particular project. We can only get 3 there because of social distancing. What can we do as we rearrange this? And remember, we're now in execution. What can we do in the short term to rearrange this? And if you're looking at 10, 20, 50, 100 different work faces, you can get to those mitigation strategies to improve the productivity of the limited craft you can put on that work face with ideas that come from the OEM. Maybe the OEM can make a change. Maybe the engineer can make a change.
Yep.
Maybe you, the owner, can be prepared to allow the work site, as Feroz talked about, to move into staggered shifts.
Yeah, staggered shift. Yeah, staggered shift. So 2 of our projects, yeah.
Don't depend on your contractor to come up with the answer by themselves. Get the whole team together and work together. And look, you're going to have to incent them, but that incentive will be small peanuts compared to the total overall savings through that collaborative group think on total mitigation.
That's right, Michael. And whether or not you've got a formal I2PD contracting, multi-party contracting structure in place or not, that doesn't prevent the owner team from being proactive in working constructively with all the participants. And if incentives are needed, then have that discussion with the contractors. But I2PD obviously is one method, but simple creative roundtable discussions about problems and solutions. What I found is most contractors are very interested in finishing the job ahead of schedule. There's typically no incentive for a general contractor to drag it out. In most cases, it actually costs them more money with overhead and labor and supervision expenses. So anything that can help increase their productivity, typically they're very willing to come to the table and have that conversation with the owners.
Good stuff. Good conversation. I think we've got time for one more question. However, we do have a bunch of questions that we probably won't get a chance to get to. But keep in mind, if you have answered something, I have recorded them here, and we'll follow up with you after the webinar. And also, what I'll do is I'll be including links to some of the previous pertinent other webinars we've done on I2PD and front-end planning that address some of the outstanding questions as well. So with that, Michael, I'd like to have you answer the next one from Ilya, which was, what would you think would be preferable for value engineering? Just an internal team revisiting their own stuff, or a customer independent third-party review?
The challenge that we see with the existing team that came up with the existing set of answers performing the value engineering is they've developed biases. They may not recognize that they've got those biases, that they've made some assumptions that they may not be able to set aside, or may not be aware that they can set them aside as they look at alternatives. So, you know, the industry out there is recognized in value engineering sessions. You need somebody outside the project. It doesn't have to be outside the company. It can be another part of your company. But ideally, somebody outside of the project team as a facilitator. And then with key discipline areas, bringing in independent third-party experts as appropriate for your project on each of the various disciplines. And what you're looking to do is not only challenge the assumptions that they went in with, and their assumptions may be valid, but challenge those assumptions, but also to stimulate creative thinking to look at alternatives.
That's right, Michael. Yeah, you know, building on that just a moment here, you know, a lot of times project teams feel that there are boundaries that limit their flexibility, either with design or execution. And an independent third party coming in with a fresh set of eyes can challenge what is the basis for that perception of a boundary condition that we're trying to live within. And quite often they'll find that that boundary is not hard, it's not firm. In other words, there is flexibility that can create value and improve overall project performance. But it takes that third party person to come in without the bias of limiting creativity.
That's great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Feroz. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to everybody who attended today. As Stephen had alluded to, we've got a great response from around the world, and which is exciting to see all the interest. With that, I will conclude, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. There will